Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Great to be up here. Thanks, Zico, for coming to hang out.
Absolutely.
So yeah, a little context here is that, so I'm Chief Scientist at Datadog. I'm also faculty at CMU. Zico is actually my boss at CMU. He's the department head. He wears, what, eight other hats?
I do a lot of things, yeah. Is this on? Yeah. I do a lot of things, that's true.
So he's, you're board member of OpenAI, startup, co-founder of GraceOne.
Yep.
And then also you're at Bosch.
I did work with Bosch a little bit too, yep.
Okay, anyway, the reason I mentioned is A, he does a lot of things, but B, I think he has a really nice bird's eye view of he has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in AI right now. So I think, honestly, part of the reason I'm excited to be here is to ask him questions that I would otherwise want to ask him anyway, just about what is going on in AI. So the way we kind of have this set up is we thought about some questions that we wanted to discuss. I'm largely going to ask him questions, get his opinion on things, and then we'll kind of chat. So, and we want to leave about 10 minutes at the end for folks to ask questions. Feel free to ask us, and especially him, any hard questions you have about AI, and we'll see where it goes. All right, so context here, as you all know, right? We've been talking a lot about AI yesterday at the keynote. AI is a kind of very big deal for us here at Datadog. It's also permeating the world, I would say. So the first kind of question I want to ask you is just sort of, how do you view kind of the promise versus the actual impact so far today of AI? You know, where is AI working? Where is it not?
Yeah, so this is so first of all, thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. Always excited to talk about state of AI with you. AI is sort of an incredible thing right now, right? As ever, you can't get away from it, right? So every single keynote seems to be about AI these days. And I think that there is this, despite all this, there's this kind of amazing divide we have between the current impact, which to be clear, is still monumental, right? We are already seeing AI be just used broadly by everyone for work, for their personal life, for everything. Yet, I still think its true promise hasn't even come close to being achieved yet, right? And I think that there are there's a lot of ways in which we're kind of only at the beginning of what we can achieve with AI. And I think that a lot of what needs to be done, to have such a technology that's potentially so transformative, but to still see sort of gaps and to still see places where it needs to grow much more to sort of have a truly transformational impact is really sort of, it's amazing, right? Because despite being the fastest adopted technology, arguably, in the history of the world, it still is nowhere close to its actual potential.
So concretely, what would you say are like the handful of applications where we've already had the aha moment, things are actually working?
Yeah, so the one I would sort of think about most, they're the boring ones, right? So things like coding. I code again, which I haven't been coding for a while, but I have a chance to actually write code again. Writing in general, I have taken to, when I have a research idea, and these are somewhat involved, hopefully state of the art, maybe not, we can talk about that later. But research ideas for my group at CMU, I'll just talk to ChatGPT Voice for a while, have kind of an exchange about it, and then ask it to write up a LaTeX, that's our typesetting language used for math, for those not in academia. I'll have it write a short document about describing that idea that I give to my students and say, hey, take a look at this. Here's an idea I had. It just changes the way that I work, right? Everything I do now is sort of in some sense mediated by these technologies, and I think that's incredible.
Actually, let me ask a question. Can you guys raise your hand? How many of you guys use AI every day, whether it's ChatGPT? Okay. Wow, okay, fair number of people. So yeah. Maybe preaching to the choir. Maybe let me ask at the other end of the spectrum, what are areas where it's falling short, right? Surprising or otherwise?
Right, and I think this is also where I feel like AI is not quite, I shouldn't say it's not living up to its potential. It's getting there, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
You currently cannot turn over all your work to an AI system, right? There's lots of tools that we use, and I'm even thinking about just for now, computer virtual work, right? I can't quite just say, take everything I do, slide preparation, you can see what I do with my time, right? That's always the first example for a lot of people. But also just sort of research, data analysis, browsing the web. I know we're getting a lot better at that, but there's still a lot of things that aren't quite there yet. using whatever custom apps you need to use as part of your enterprise suite of tools, you can't quite just say, hey, take over all of this and just do it all. And I think this actually is a big blocker for a lot of companies that want to adopt AI. They sort of hear this notion that, oh yes, AI can do everything an employee can do in many cases, or it's going to do it in a few years, yet we sort of can't just turn over all apps to AI systems yet. I think we're going to get there, but I think this notion of sort of generic virtual work is still one of the areas where, just honestly speaking, we have a lot of progress. There's a lot of progress to be made. Now, I think it's going to come incredibly quickly, but I do think that that's an area where we just haven't quite seen that transition yet.
Right.
The way we have, say, with coding or with text.
So it's hard to make, given how fast the field is moving, maybe I'm answering this question for you, but like, what do you think things will look like in 5 years in terms of what we are using it for or not using it for?
Yeah, 5 years is a crazy long time to think about right now. I think in
3 months.
3 months. Oh yeah, that's a better thing. So I do think that the next leap is going to be sort of the I shouldn't say takeover, but the expansion of AI tools that we all already use to a wider range of computer interfaces, that, you know, a wider range of tools that we can use with these things. These are kind of mundane, right? In some sense, we all know this is coming. We see it coming. There are preliminary versions of, say, web browsing agents or computer use agents. They aren't there yet. They're not usable the way ChatGPT is usable for kind of any text task you want to do, but they're going to get there.
Yeah. All right, so maybe switching gears a little bit, and this is kind of a question that I've thought about a bunch. I think many in the room probably are thinking about as well, but maybe more with kind of our work hats on. The OpenAIs, Anthropics, Googles of the world are building these, bigger, more increasingly powerful frontier models. There are also, most enterprises are, Datadog included, are kind of leaning into AI, right? Lots of, I feel like in the last month or so, there's been news about like Duolingo and Spotify. They had memos that they sent to their employees saying we need to be AI native. People need, we need to make sure that we're making our existing employees more productive. There are big companies, including, say, Datadog, building out research labs themselves. I'm curious how you see the interplay between, and it's kind of a broad question that we can dive deeper into, but kind of how do you see the interplay between the OpenAI, Anthropics, Googles of the world building these big models and enterprises that are also trying to figure out what it all means to them?
It's a great question, and I don't have a great set of answers here because I don't know how this future will develop. I can see vastly different evolutions of different possible futures coming out here. So you use the example of companies like Duolingo that just mentioned they want to be a Pittsburgh, also a CMU related company there, Pittsburgh-based company. I think there are a lot of companies for which, to be blunt about it, I actually don't really mean Duolingo here, but I mean there's a lot of companies where, to be blunt about it, you can achieve a lot of what they do just talking with ChatGPT and asking it to do the same thing, right? There's a lot of instruction. There's
if not now, maybe.
And if not now, then very soon, right? A lot of code, a lot of development tools you can use. Instruction. I mean, even things like gaming and stuff. I think actually a lot of what we like about sort of a lot of games can actually be recreated in ChatGPT. So I feel like there is a world where a lot of current industry, and I don't want to say it's taken over by OpenAI, and I don't just mean OpenAI, but the OpenAIs, Googles, Anthropics of the world. But what made a certain company or product special is now essentially replicated by these AI models. Right. And you can basically recreate what that company did in 2 minutes, because if you just ask one of these models to do it, it will basically do it for you. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the goal of these companies, but it's just going to happen, right? So as these models get better and better, they will just take over certain fields. And that's sort of one reality. Now, I don't think it's going to happen to every industry, because I do think that in many cases there are domains, or maybe more importantly, things like data moats that a lot of companies have that are going to be very, very hard to replace by just asking a large language model or whatever, whatever the next iteration of these things are, large agents, whatever you want. But I do think that the most likely outcome, as with many sort of revolutions, though I do think this revolution is fundamentally different than the internet or even the industrial revolution, I do think that there are going to be a lot of businesses that fold, but a lot that also continue kind of in their same track.
Yeah.
And this has been our history in the past. You will likely have to adopt these technologies to survive in this world, but I think there will be plenty of industry that continues kind of as it is, just with the adoption of AI tools.
Yeah, I guess two things I'd say to add on to that. One, in the context of data being a moat, I think we're starting to see this, right? We were talking about how, I think just yesterday, Salesforce announced that.
Can't use Slack, yeah.
Right, and that makes sense, right? Slack is a rich source of data. If that is their moat, it makes sense for them to protect that against, other people just using it for free. So I think people are wisening up, or companies are wisening up to their data being their moat. But I think the second point is, again, I maybe am not the world's best historian, but there are many examples, again, we talked about this before, of, dominant companies, some of which did adapt and remained. Microsoft's a great example, right?
Yeah.
They had one business model, slightly different now, maybe some troubles in between, but they're doing great again.
Right.
Other companies, maybe we need to name that did not adapt so well, that were dominant, 10, 20 years ago, that are not at all anymore.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting how there were a lot of software companies that adapted well and became internet companies, right? And I won't name any, again, we all have some in mind. And there are other software companies that just did not become internet companies and are no longer the companies they once were.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe that this current set of internet companies, some will become AI companies and become dominant figures as AI companies, and some will not. They will continue to be internet companies, and in doing so, they will become much less relevant in the future. I think this is the way technology always goes. It has always gone. Again, I think this is a qualitatively different step change in technology. I do believe that. But I also do think that in terms of enterprise, we're going to see a lot of similar effects.
Yeah. I mean, there is the other extreme that there ends up being three companies, say Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google, that just take over every single industry, dominate every single vertical. But to me, that seems implausible.
Yeah, the notion of taking over every single vertical, again, I think there are verticals where you can do what you want to do with a AI interface, with a chatbot interface, with a computer use agent interface. But there are also verticals where you just can't, right? You need that. You need the data. You need, I won't even say specialized knowledge. Now, let's be a little bit more futuristic here. It is possible that the people writing, or the beings writing these new, running these new enterprises will be AI systems, right? Or to a large extent could be highly driven by AI systems. So I don't know what that new enterprise looks like, but I don't think these companies just want or need to actually capture every single vertical in order to succeed. That's not, at least right now, the goal of any of them as far as I'm aware.
So maybe drilling down a little deeper into this idea of general versus specialized, right? This is something that I talk about a lot too, right? At least the way I see it is, I don't think it's, right, on one hand, yes, the new technology is a risk for incumbents in different verticals, different areas, that's natural. But I also don't think, as we've been talking about, that it's necessarily zero-sum, or it's all of one or all of the other. My take is that, yes, there are these general purpose models that are just increasingly getting better. It seems like part of what they can do is sort of science fiction, right? Like, we talk a lot in research critiquing their capabilities, nitpick about benchmarks, about, oh, that's not a real fair comparison, this or that, or they hallucinate, whatever else. But if you took this technology and rewound 20 years and dropped it to somebody, they would think that this is like an alien technology. I think it's that incredible. At the same time, right, data being a moat, and different verticals having very specific problems that they want to solve with particular metrics of interest and ways to actually evaluate success. To me, there seems to be a role for both kind of these general purpose models and specialized models or something that takes advantage of the specialized data. But I'm curious, yeah, you kind of alluded to this before, but could you maybe expand more on how you see these things potentially interplaying?
Yeah, so I think that oftentimes people talk about AI models as one big class of thing, right? And you have general purpose models on the one hand, you have specialized models on the other hand, but these are all just machine learning models. And for different purposes, sometimes you want a general model, sometimes you want a specialized model, et cetera. I think we're reaching a point where even thinking about these as the same class of thing could be a real mistake.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is these are really targeting entirely different goals, right? So I don't think that linear regression is not needed anymore, right? When you have some data and you want to understand the trend line of that data, you use linear regression. You don't use an LLM to predict that. But again, and you know, just to make the analogy a little bit further, there will be a use for time series models, for probably even computer vision models, because as good as VLMs are at computer vision for sort of explanatory tasks, VLMs are visual language models. They're LLMs, AI models that take in images too. They're not as fast as a lot of the specialized computer vision models we have. I don't know if I want a large language model driving an autonomous car, for example. I want more specialized, faster models. There's all sorts of reasons to have specialized models. But the question to me is, to be kind of blunt about it, is who is the one developing those specialized models ultimately? Because I could very much see a world where LLMs in some cases, and you know, the models, you know, the big models the big AI models we think about right now, they are in fact the ones that will be developing most of those specialized models. So when you want to solve a simple data analysis problem, you are not going to build an LLM for that problem. But what you are going to do is upload that data to an LLM. It will write some code, figure out what, you know, analyze that, the results of that, figure out where the errors may be, iterate on this process, and solve your problem all in a matter of minutes. And so in some sense, is that the LLM doing the work? I would argue kind of yes, in some sense, right? It's not that the LLM is just directly taking your data as input and producing an output. That would be sort of, that's not how these things work. But I think that specialized models arguably will just be one more tool that these large models work. And it's very hard for me to sort of have a domain or a technique or a problem that I am very confident will not eventually be done better by LLMs than they will be by people writing that same code or doing that same kind of analysis.
Yeah. All right, so I want to ask, we're going to skip around a little bit because the next question I want to ask is sort of how we got here.
Yeah.
In the sense of, right, so at least my take of the world is, and I realize there's a, you know, audience here is very smart, AI savvy, but maybe not AI researchers. So I'm going to ask this question with the understanding that, you know, we're talking at a level that is not talking to PhD students in machine learning, but, you know, we're about the same age. We've been in the field for 20 years, which is dating ourselves a little bit now. It's terrible. But when we both started, we were in this world where, you know, machine learning was all about math. You had to work on models where you could prove, the models had to be, you had to be able to prove exactly what they were doing, what answers they were going to converge to. And they were mathematically beautiful. The people working on these problems were very mathematically sophisticated. It turned out the models just didn't work all that well because they didn't, not that they didn't work, but they were like necessarily very restrictive. But then we've seen kind of in our short tenure being, you know, researchers, a bunch of these kind of crazy jumps, right? 2012, deep learning emerged, right? It was kind of classical neural networks on steroids a little bit, and they kind of dominated computer vision tasks. At the end of the 2010s, we started seeing early language models, maybe smaller language models, things like BERT and so on. Then we saw these scaling laws emerge and these models get bigger and bigger and bigger. Very recently, this idea of kind of test time compute has been talked about as yet another kind of big step in innovation. So I guess my question is first, like to what extent do you agree that these are, or I guess, to what extent are these the big transformational leaps, or some or all of them? And second question is kind of, do we have all the ingredients that we need? Or like, part of the assumption in all this discussion is that these trend lines keep going up, and we're not plateauing yet. They're just going to continue to get better. So the question then is like, do we have all the ingredients we need to continue to get better? Or are there new kind of step changes needed to actually get to where we want to go, such, talking about all the future things that we're talking about?
Right. There's always going to be new innovations needed, I think. I think that will continue for a very long time. Again, arguably, who's coming up with those innovations could be a point of discussion, but I think there will be a need, of course, for new innovations. I think the sort of history you give is, of course, sort of in a lot of ways kind of, obviously, factually all accurate. That is kind of the history of what happened. I would put a particular discovery particularly prominent in there. And that's this discovery. And I want to be clear, this is a discovery. It's not something we built. We discovered this. We discovered that when you train a model to predict words based upon the internet, right? This is presumably how large language, everyone knows this is how large language models work, right? They take the previous text and predict the next word. You just keep iterating this to generate text. It is a discovery that when you build a model like this, based upon a big enough model, based upon enough data from the internet, and you then turn this loose and ask it to start generating more text, that produces intelligence. That is, I would argue, again, a discovery, not something we built, that didn't have to be that way. I didn't know that would happen. I don't think many people, there were a few people, like Ilya maybe and Alec Radford, that sort of knew about this, that knew this would be happening, but most of us didn't.
I would argue it's still something that we don't really understand why.
Oh, we don't understand why at all.
It's kind of bizarre that this works, but
totally bizarre that it works. It's absolutely crazy that it works, but it does work. Everything else, I would argue, is kind of the scaffolding around that. So, deep learning models are a good candidate for the class of model we use to build these things. There could be other versions that would work. It's just that those happen to be really easy to train. We had nice ways to build them. Things like test time inference, that's sort of leveraging, that's this sort of reasoning and recent reasoning models. Those are leveraging this idea to arguably accelerate that intelligence, right? But this fundamental idea that taking a big model and training it to predict words, I think it's and this results in intelligence, at least the best bet we have for intelligence that we know of currently. This is a discovery on par with, I think, anything in the last 100 years, and if this really pans out, then maybe in all of human history, which is really unbelievable. So I do think that in general, there is a very natural progression of this, and people built simpler language models to begin with. There's sort of a very natural progression. But somewhere, there was this.
But do you think that discovery, do you think we need more of those discoveries to truly get to intelligence? Or
so right, I don't think so.
You think that it's now more of incremental test time compute, and not that those are not interesting.
Exactly. So if I were to sort of classify the big innovations, the advent of deep learning, and really deep learning is sort of multi-tier modular differentiable functions, really, right? This discovery about predicting language, test time compute, I think we will need more things like the first and the last one there.
Yeah.
We will need more innovations like test time compute. We will need more innovations like reinforcement learning tuning of these large language models. I don't think we need another fundamental scientific discovery like the fact that intelligence emerges out of this. I think it does.
Right.
And we will need to scale, we will need to build, we will need to innovate. But I think that the way I would put it is I think we are, if I look back 10 years ago, I think we are closer. I think the leap in the last 10 years is bigger than the leap we will need in the next 10 years to achieve what we would all, at least right now, maybe we won't then, but we'd all right now call general purpose intelligence.
So now, if I were going to channel my inner Jan LeCun and say, LLMs are, so Jan LeCun, one of the godfathers of machine learning, AI, professor at NYU, somebody who we both know. Is it fair to say he's a skeptic of LLMs?
Yeah.
He thinks they're a great tool, but skeptic in terms of them being, basically I would argue that he would probably disagree with what you say.
Yes.
In the sense that, he says, LLMs are a great tool, but they're limited. We need world models. We need this, we need that to actually get to true intelligence. How would you view that?
This is, again, he's a smart guy. We have our opinions. I think he is wrong about this, was the way I would classify it.
Yeah.
I think that actually
he's not here, so we can say whatever we
his
want
desirata for what he calls world models is actually not that different from what I see LLMs basically already doing, and doing even more so as you hook up agents. I think what will ultimately happen is we will develop LLMs that have tool use, they have agentic state, they have all these things, and he will just say, well, that's actually a world model.
Right.
That was you did build the world model, and I don't care to debate nomenclature at that point. Sure, it's a world model at that point. It will solve the tasks that we want to solve.
All right. All right, so we have about 14 minutes left. I'm gonna ask a few more questions, then open it up to you guys, so start thinking about questions you wanna ask. But maybe the last set of questions, we are both parents of kids that are young and also educators and researchers. So maybe these are all kind of taken together, but to state the obvious, in the same way that enterprises are gonna change and lots of things about life are gonna change, but that includes how we do research, you've alluded to that, but also kind of how we educate our kids and how we educate people at university level as well. I don't know what order you wanna take this in, or we can talk about this in any order, but research or education. Mm-hmm. But why don't we start with education? Because you touched upon research. Like, what how are universities gonna adapt? How do they need? Right, you are the department head in machine learning at CMU. The world is different. How do we adapt to teaching people about this?
This is going to be, in some sense, the biggest challenge and opportunity for education. Again, I think bigger than the internet. Ultimately, we have a machine that can solve every single homework problem you will ever give to a student ever, at least through their undergrad, right? Maybe grad school too at some point. There's two main questions about this. The first question is, how do we teach critical thinking in a way that survives what must be a overwhelming temptation to essentially circumvent this? And I don't want to use the word cheat, because I think that whether it's cheating or not really depends a lot on how you use AI. But it is absolutely possible to circumvent the hard struggle, because education is a struggle. You have to struggle with concepts for a while to get them, and that teaches you a concept. I think getting students to experience that struggle is genuinely hard. Are we gonna make them just do nothing but write in the little blue books again for code and stuff like that? Maybe we will have to do some of that. On the flip side, there have to be ways to leverage. I mean, I learn a ton from AI, right? When I want to read a paper, I often just summarize it with AI first, and then dive in if I want to. There have to be ways to augment our education with AI. And so we have to be able to actually do better, be more focused, build tutors customized to each student with these tools. There has to be a way to leverage, and tons of people are working on it, to be clear, including at CMU. But then, and so reshaping education based upon this is going to be crucially important, and it's going to be massive challenges, but also huge potential benefits. But the other thing I'll say is that the other thing we have to do is we have to just teach people how to use AI tools. And that's really hard, by the way, because faculty do not like to change their course every semester, right? We like to have one course we design once and can teach for 10 years, no problem, right? That's much better use of we amortize our time investment that way. But the reality is, I don't know that you can teach a course right now on how to use AI tools and have it be relevant for more than a semester. Right. Because they're changing so fast. So how do we do that? How do we keep up with a field where this is clearly something that employers want from their new employees.
AI native companies, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to have to know how to use these things. Do they really just learn that on the job? Is it training, or can we actually teach it? And how do we teach it? What are the underlying principles? Because this is kind of what educators like to do, right? With finding underlying principles that will enable people to use AI tools. How do we teach them how to do that? So education is going to be massively reshaped. I am very daunted by this, full transparency. Yeah. And that's just at the college level. We both have young kids. I don't even know what changes at the grade school level and earlier.
Maybe a related question. What are the, again, we're hypothesizing here, but what are the skills that are gonna, you think, outlive future, more mature AI versus things that are just gonna be displaced by it?
Yeah, social skills probably will last. Yeah. I think humans fundamentally are social animals. Yeah. Despite a few, and by the way, we will have social relations with AIs too. I say thank you, and I get annoyed with my AI agents, and when I propose something and it's too enthusiastic, I get really frustrated by it, right? But look, it's not a replacement for human relationships, right? It's just, that will be an important point. Yeah. I think humans are social animals. We will want that. For now, physical work is kind of also something, but who knows with robots, that might happen. That might be soon out of our domain as well. I have to think that things like being a little bit more, traditional education now, I have to think that things like critical thinking and general skills and flexibility, the ability to pick up new things quickly, these are sort of meta skills that even though our education is in a particular area, these are actually the skills that we're really learning as we educate ourselves to a large extent. So I do think these will be valuable things to have no matter what, but it's very hard to nail down a particular technical field where I'm confident we will not be soon made irrelevant from AI.
I guess we were talking about this earlier too, the Sam Altman blog post yesterday, the idea that like all of our jobs, you want to tell people about that?
Yeah, so Sam wrote a blog post yesterday, and one point that resonated with me and that I've talked with him about before is this notion that in 100 years, all our jobs will look pretend. Because our jobs right now are just pretend jobs. Someone 1,000 years ago would have looked at our lives and said, you're not doing real work. What are you talking about? You're not making food. You're not creating clothing. You're not building shelters. You have everything you need to live. What are you doing? Playing games with education and computers and these sorts of things. You're just playing computer games. The difference between serious work on a computer and a computer game would have been completely indistinguishable 100 years ago. I think in 100 years, our jobs will look like games to us right now. I don't know what they're going to be. I think they'll be very fulfilling.
That doesn't mean there won't be jobs. It's just hard
there will be jobs. People are very hardwired to want to do things, to live their lives, right? And I think work is an important part of life. But I think, yes, very likely our jobs 100 years will look like pretend to us right now. They'll look like a bunch of people playing games. Yet, to us then, these will seem like the most productive things we can be doing. They will seem like the most valuable things we can be doing. We will have offloaded a lot of what we will then consider complete kind of grunt work to AI systems, and hopefully things will. That's the positive scenario, by the way. But that is hopefully where we are going.
Yeah, we have not talked about safety in the negative side. We're also. I want to now leave time for questions. So if you want to ask a question, just stand in front of the mic and you can line up, and we'll see how many we can get to.
Yeah.
That was the most enthusiastic hand.
I know. Usually we have to guilt people in for a few minutes asking questions.
Kind of prepared. You ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Go for it.
So I have some precursors. So I believe adoption is inevitable. I think probably everyone in the room does. I also believe all these agents and things will essentially become free and as part of products, enterprise or whatever you buy. Things will change. Everyone will level up. We'll all be using it. But will there be any more money to be made? Because as of yet, we're unable, as you said, to imagine the new products of the future. Pretty much in the same way we failed to imagine the products of the future in the past. And you said, Zico, there's always a need for new innovations, but what if we're wrong? And there are no real money-making new products. And it's really important because all of this has to be paid for. The people paying for it at the moment will want payback. And making a profit is not a dirty word. It has to happen. Yep. What are your thoughts on that?
When there have been, so I do think the notion of money and wealth likely will survive AI. I just see it very hard to disrupt that. This has been going on since the dawn of humanity. We have wanted to trade goods for some unit of measure that we can exchange for other goods. I think that will happen. That will continue with AI. I think that will survive AI. And now, the nature, again, what we do with that money, what we think of spending it on could change drastically, right? What we ascribe value to. But I think when you have a technology that is able to produce so much of what we currently ascribe value to, in the short term, you're going to make a lot of money because you're going to be able to accomplish that, make money from doing those things still. And in the longer term, we will spend money on very different things, and I don't quite know how that will all play out, again, in the optimistic view. But I think that it's going to remain. I think that there's an inertia to human society, and there are certain things that seem rather permanent, and the notion of value and exchanging credits for value or for things of value, I think will persist. And that's why, so the bottom line is, I think there will be, I don't worry about paying for the AI systems. I think with the amount of valuable work they do, plenty of people will be more than happy to pay for them.
You've spoken some about future generations in terms of jobs and what those will look like, and education and what that will look like for our kids. But what are your thoughts on like the environmental impact that a lot of these like AI tools and language learning models are having, and how do you see that affecting our future generations, and what sort of things are being put in place now that you're seeing, or in your opinion, that will improve the current course of that?
Yeah, so I think that there's a number of answers here. I mean, I will fully admit that I am, in some sense, I believe the value of these systems outweigh the environmental costs of building them. I think it will be a net positive, including hopefully for the environment long term, where we can leverage this technology to in fact build more efficient sources of energy, help us transition away from fossil fuels, this kind of thing in the medium term even, right? Now, having said that, that's I obviously am biased in this regard, right? I work in AI. There's a cognitive dissonance involved where I want to be able to have these things and to use them. Having said that, I do think that in the course of the sort of the progress of the world as a whole and society as a whole, there is inherently more energy use, more losing of resources. I do think that ultimately, to a certain extent, this is the nature of progress, is that we do these things. Now, that sounds very negative in a lot of ways, because I also fundamentally believe that these tools will enable us to be more efficient, to build better sources of energy, all these things, to eventually harness energy better from the sun or from nuclear power, whatever you want to draw it from. But I think most technologies have this trade-off. And I would just argue my personal belief, and this is sort of as a believer in technology, is that it is usually worth the cost. Not of everything, but I think AI is also a relatively small portion of the total cost that we are creating as a society here, or the total environmental cost we are extracting. And so I think it will ultimately be a net positive as far as technologies go.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Then else.
Answer too long here.
It sounds like you described these general LLM models more like meta tools, that they would be using other tools.
Yes.
Do you think that's where the future leads?
Yes, definitely. Already, this is the case, right? So already, if you use the O3 model from OpenAI, right, it doesn't do everything itself. It writes Python code. It searches the web. It it scans images and does image analysis based upon other systems, right? I just think that just like humans are not very useful, that's a sort of a odd way of putting it. I can't do work very well if you take away my computer. I just can't, right? I'm really bad at doing work if you take away all tools from me, even a pencil and paper. I get almost nothing done. And I think just like that, if you think of the LLM as the core underlying intelligence, in order to realize that intelligence, you want to use things separate from yourself. And that's just the nature of intelligence. Intelligence, I mean, tool use is fundamental, arguably, to the development of what we even think of as humanity. And so I think it's going to be, of course, these things are going to use tools heavily. What we think of right now as AI systems is really going to be the conjunction of the model with the vast assortment of tools it can use.
All right, perfect. We're right at time. I don't know how this ends, but I thank you guys for listening.
Thanks very much.